Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome everybody, Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. It's great to be with you today. Back in the dojo, having fun. Had a great discussion with Christine Flynn yesterday about newbie Catholics. Great advice for families and people who just are entering into the church, trying to nice. And great discussion. Actually, today we're going to be talking with her husband, Pat Flynn, of the Pat Flynn Show. And we're going to switch gears and talk about some, I think, some very fundamental issues in regards to existence of God. As you know, he is the brain when it comes to theistic apologetics, defending the existence of God. We're going to talk about natural law and ethics and whether there is an objective standard for morality. And that's going to be a ton of fun on the other side of the break. He's going to be coming on. Also, I want to welcome all of you watching live stream on Facebook, YouTube, all the other platforms we live stream on. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. All right. Back in the saddle. That's right, Beth. And I also want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country and also via podcasts around the world through our handy-dandy phone app or through our flagship website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And welcome aboard. Great to be with you. Great to be with you. Got so much happening. You need to know this. This is an apologetics program. This is Defending the Faith 101. And there is a free conference that's going to be going on October 23rd through 25th. So it's coming up this weekend. It's a virtual conference put on by Pints with Aquinas, Virtual Catholic Apologetics Conference. There are going to be over 50 presenters at this virtual conference, and including yours truly. And afterwards, many of us are going to do virtual booths. So you can watch a talk if you want. You can go to a booth, ask questions, hang out, chat a while. As you know, as you probably guessed, I'm going to be doing my talk on the Deuterocanon, the Old Testament canon. And so, yeah, check it out. I mean, it's free resources. It's available for the conference. All you have to do is register, and you can access great minds in apologetics. I'm just looking like Scott Hahn, Father Gregory Pine, Matt Fred. I'm just pulling people out. Let's see, Father Dwight Longnecker, William Albrecht, Dr. Robert Delfino, Jimmy Aiken, Eric Ibarra, Ed Fazer, Jim Burnham, John DeRosa. Man, the list goes down and on. Michael Barber. Great stuff. Like I said, over 50 presenters and booths, and that's a great apologetics resource. And the way the virtual conferences work is it's free. You can access it for that weekend. Once the weekend's over, though, there's a paywall to access the talks. So if you have your weekend cleared, check it out. Just go to pintswithaquinas.com, and you could get information on that. And I'd love to see you, too. Check it out. We could talk about the Deuterocanon, and which is very apropos because I came up with my Apocrypha Apocalypse project, and I might as well give a little plug for that. As you know, I'm starting a new project on YouTube called Apocrypha Apocalypse. You can find it in the search engine or just type in Gary Michuta. And I'm putting up some really fun videos where I am really poking holes in the Protestant narrative as to why Protestant Bibles should reject 7 Old Testament books that Catholic and Orthodox Bibles have. We're having a lot of fun. And I need your help, by the way, because it's a brand new channel, but it's not going to have the reach or really the outreach to our separated brethren unless people participate. So if you could, please stop by, like, subscribe, do all those things that you do in social media. And that helps promote it in the search engine, and that also helps get this information out to the people who really need it. So please check it out on YouTube, Apocrypha Apocalypse. I truly appreciate it. And I also want to thank all of you who have already subscribed. Thank you so much. And God willing, we'll be up there on the search engines and really be able to exploit this very important, I consider it the Achilles heel of Protestant theology, is they're missing part of the Word of God. Now, what better cause could there be than to support for people to have the complete and full Word of God? It's hard to think of anything to top that. So anyway, that is my announcements. Great announcements too. I'm excited about the virtual conference. So why don't we jump to our exercises, shall we? As you know, every episode we look at informal fallacy in our Finding the Fallacy segment. Today's informal fallacy is the incomplete comparison. Incomplete comparison occurs when two things are compared that really aren't related in order to make something look more appealing than it is. It also happens when conclusions are made with incomplete information. And as you know on the show, we look at propaganda techniques every Friday, and there's a funny pairing between informal fallacies and propaganda. And the sister propaganda technique to this fallacy would be the misuse of relative terms. And so it happens when, for example, you say that you use a comparative term, but you don't mention what it's being compared to. For example, you could say that hands-on apologetics is 50% better, which sounds really good, doesn't it? But 50% better than what? 50% better than white noise? 50% better than getting your teeth pulled at the dentist? You know, it may actually be worse than better. So you always need, whenever you're using a relative term, you need to anchor that into something specific. This used to be, when I was a young kid, you saw this all the time on store shelves and advertising. They would always say more filling, better tasting, less calories, things like that. But they never actually say what these comparisons were made to. And then they passed a law, and then it requires them to put the asterisks there and tell you exactly how, back up those assertions. So you don't really see it that much nowadays. But it was common, I remember, when I was younger. So that is our Finding the Fallacy for today, the incomplete comparison. Let's jump to the Meet the Early Church Father segment. As you know, every episode also, we learn a little bit about one of the early church fathers. Many, many early church fathers, very important for defending the faith. Why? Because these are early Christians whose writings witness to the belief of the earliest stages of Christianity. And so it's so effective when you can show that from word go, Christians believed certain things and did not believe other things. And so today's Meet the Early Church Father, I would hazard to guess that 99% of even apologists never heard of this particular person. It is Paulus Orsius. Paulus Orsius, who flourished around AD 415. Well, let's learn a little bit about Orsius. Orsius is generally counted as a Spanish priest, though in fact his birthplace has most likely been in Barcara in Braga in Portugal. Fleeing from Vandals, and by the way, Vandals here are, of course, the barbarian hordes. They're not kids with spray paint. Fleeing from Vandals, he came in 414 AD to Hippo, where he presented to St. Augustine his commentary on the errors of Priscillianist and the Origenist. He asked Augustine to use this outline of errors in writing a major refutation, and Augustine obliged. He wrote a response, which is the Tu Orsium Presbyter against Priscillian and the Origenist in one book. Sorry, folks, I'm kind of translating Latin on the fly here. Augustine was very much taken by the abilities of Orsius, and sent him to Bethlehem in 415 AD to consult with Jerome on the question of the origin of the soul, and likewise to warn Jerome about Pelagius, who had lately gone to Palestine. At Bethlehem in that same year, Orsius wrote his book, The Apology. Orsius had been there less than a year in Palestine when he left, intending to return back to Spain. Arriving at the island of Minorca, the reports of wars and barbarian atrocities in Spain frightened him off, and he went instead to Hippo and Augustine. At Hippo, he wrote his well-known work, The History Against the Pagans, in 7 books. And after 418 AD, we hear of him no more. Whether he died in Africa or he finally returned to Spain, we simply don't know. Now, it's interesting, the background to his work called The Apology. Upon his arrival in Bethlehem in 415, Orsius almost immediately became deeply involved in the Pelagian controversy. If you remember, Pelagianism is the denial of original sin, that we can work our way to heaven. He was summoned to the Council of Jerusalem on July 30th, 415, to inform the Synod Fathers on the standing of Pelagius in Africa and what was being done about him there. And the president of the council was John of Jerusalem, who had taken Pelagius under his wing and found no fault with him. The information given to Orsius angered John, or given by Orsius angered John, and heated words were exchanged at the council itself. Soon after the council, John accused Orsius of blasphemy on the grounds that he had said, "Is not even with God's help could man remain without sin," and that provoked him to write his apology. Now, hear the music coming up. Coming up next, we have our good friend Pat Flynn. It's going to be coming out. We're going to talk about natural law. Stay tuned, folks.
Our nation is too full of those that are crying down. Down with the police, down with the churches, down with teachers, down with government. Can you build anything down? You cannot. Certainly time in our nation to change our words. And let's begin now to use the word up. Up from all of this filth. Up from this violence. Up from this indifference of courts. Up to the hid battlements of eternity. Up to God.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Mary Ann Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome everybody back to Hands On Apologetics. And we're going to be talking about the natural law. And the most natural person I could think of to do that is our good friend Pat Flynn of The Pat Flynn Show, which covers everything from fitness to mental health to business, writing to philosophy and theology. He's a best-selling author, philosopher, fitness coach, musician, entrepreneur, and he expounds on the theory of generalism, a theory applicable to each and every one of us. You can check out all his great stuff, by the way, at chroniclesofstrength.com. And Pat Flynn, welcome back to Hands On Apologetics.
Always a joy to be with you, Gary. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. How are things going in Wisconsin?
Things are going well. We had a little flurry of snow last night. It's a little early in the season here, even for Wisconsin. I'm not up north in Wisconsin. I'm a little bit closer to Chicago, so it's not the frozen tundra that everybody assumes it is. But yeah, a little chilly, but otherwise well. The family's doing well. All things considered, with 2020 being something of an exceptional year, and I use that term very loosely. Can't complain. God has been good to us. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Yeah. I think of all the different fields, I've heard you talk on a lot of different fields on apologetics, but your sweet spot definitely is theistic apologetics because of your journey. I mean, you were an atheist, you worked your way into theism, and there's so many different aspects of that area of apologetics, and one of it's ethics. And I don't know, there is some work on it. I haven't delved too much into it. I understand you've been doing a lot.
Yeah, I have a few papers that I hope to submit for publication pertaining to ethics and trying to defend natural law and aspects of traditional natural law, including the ever controversial perverted faculty argument, which maybe we could touch on that a little bit. And for me, and as I made my way to theism and eventually Catholicism, ethics played a pretty significant part in that. Because even when I was a skeptic, I had certain moral intuitions, call them seemings, that I couldn't give up, right? And we've talked about this before, whereas I was kind of exploring the different varieties of atheism, materialism, physicalism, Platonism, whatever, the really off-putting fact for me seemed that if I was going to have an atheism that was really worth adopting, it would have to be reductionistic. The Platonic forms of atheism and the Aristotelian forms of atheism really just seem like theism light to me. As soon as you start admitting, certain things into your ontology as an atheist, it's hard to see why you wouldn't just become a theist, right? The attractive thing about certain aspects of atheism, if there is an attractive thing at all, or at least what was attractive to me, is a sort of apparent simplicity to it. And I say apparent simplicity because I think it's an illusory simplicity that's going to strip you away, or that is going to strip away certain features of reality, not so much by explaining them, but by explaining them away. And morality would be one of those things, right? Where, you take a sort of nihilistic, materialistic atheism, and whatever else morality is, it's something that we throw off onto the world, right? It's something that we invent. It's something that we project. So there's no real moral binding structure to the world, right? And so the project really becomes one of trying to explain how we seem to be so fantastically deluded in these seemings, right, of this sort of normative force that there really seems to be a sort of oughtness to the world. Like, we ought not murder, we ought not rape, and we feel like if we do these things, we're doing something really and truly wrong. And as I was kind of going deeper into atheism, these were positions that never sat well with me at all. And they gave me some reason to want to reevaluate, right, metaphysically, my commitments at the time. And so ethics was something that played a substantial part in my conversion experience, both philosophically and then religiously, because once I did stumble upon traditional natural law, I found it to be extremely robust, very satisfying. It's extremely systematic. It has a very rigorous and very respectable pedigree behind it, intellectual pedigree. And it also, I would say, converges upon the Catholic Church in particular. And that was one of the pieces of evidence for me that was in favor of the Catholic Church, because it seemed like in certain instances the Catholic Church was consistently getting the implications of natural law right, whereas other religions and denominations weren't. One aspect of this that might be off-putting to certain people of a secular ethical bent would be something like birth control, right? Where it seems like you had this sort of collapse of Christianity to move along with culture on birth control, but the Catholic Church stubbornly held out. Now, if you're a secularist, you'll think that there's something archaic and cobwebbed about the Catholic Church. But if you're into traditional natural law and you understand that there are implications in sexual ethics and all this other stuff that we may or may not get into, you'll see that the Catholic Church marks itself off in a very surprising way to an outsider. But as a Catholic, it's not surprising, because one of the Catholic commitments is this idea of indefectibility. The Church cannot err in matters of faith, morals, or sacrament. So this ended up being a strong piece of evidence for me in favor of Catholicism, the stability and the consistency of the Church's moral teachings. Now, put aside any failures of any Catholic people, laity, or leaders, the Church herself, her moral teachings were extremely beautiful and consistent to me. So in that sense, it wasn't just a purely metaphysical project for me. Ethics definitely veered me towards the Catholic Church as a whole over time as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, well, you mentioned natural law a couple of times, and I know just trying to understand what natural law is for the average person in the pew is kind of difficult, because the first thing you think of natural law, well, those are the laws of nature, like gravity and things like that. So maybe we should start by defining what we mean by what is the natural law.
Right. Yeah. Good. Because you're right. There's often a lot of confusion and ambiguity and equivocation. We also don't mean like Mother Nature at large. Sometimes you'll mention natural law theory and people will go, haha, LOL. Don't you know that baboons engage in all this crazy behavior? Are you saying that humans should do that as well?
Yeah.
And of course, no, that's not what we mean when we say natural law, right? What we mean is that things have essences, right? So traditional natural law is, the reason it's attractive and the reason I think it's correct is it is sort of an extension from a greater metaphysical project. And the two sort of metaphysical or philosophical foundations of natural law would be essentialism on one hand and teleology on the other. And essentialism just holds that there are real essences in the world, that things really have natures, or to use Aristotelian language, substantial forms. So there's such a thing as human nature. And, the traditional understanding of that is something like rational animality. There's something of the nature of triangularity, for example, right, that has something to do with being a closed plane figure with straight sides whose angles add up to 180 degrees. We can make sense of that. There's something of what it means to have a dog nature, to have an acorn nature. And inherent to natures are certain aims or ends that are conducive to the objective perfection or flourishing of those natures. So take something simple, a stock example like a triangle. When somebody draws a triangle, if they don't take their time and they rush it, and the triangle has wavy sides and rounded angles, we say, as a matter of objective fact, that is a bad triangle. Because in some sense, it fails to meet our expectations of what the nature of triangularity is, right? And this isn't committing the so-called fact-value distinction, because that wouldn't even apply to natural law because of the prior philosophical commitments. When we understand the natures of things, value, so to speak, is sort of just baked into the metaphysical cake, right? So when we say that's a bad triangle, it's failing to meet the exemplar. Right, it's failing to meet our expectations. It's not just I prefer my triangles this way, like I prefer raspberry or blueberry yogurt. It's no, right. You drew a bad triangle, dude, and you deserve a bad grade, right? And I don't care what your opinion is on it. This is a matter of objective fact. Triangles are a simple example to start with, but the principles carry over. There's a human nature, right, of what it means to be and flourish as the kind of thing that we are, which is a rational animal. And that, of course, is a little more complicated. It takes more unpacking. But once we understand what that is, we can talk very meaningfully and substantially about what the good life is. And the moral life is just the good life considered for rational beings that can decide, among various particular means to pursue their proper and final end. And that's the teleological component, right? That certain things are directed at certain effects or even ranges of effects, right? Acorns by nature are always directed towards, unless they're frustrated, becoming oak trees. For example, they never just suddenly sprout into lions or gazelles or African elephants or things like that, right? Dogs reliably give birth to other dogs and puppies, right? Not human beings and stuff like that. There's again certain ends. Maybe it's one end, maybe it's multiple ends, maybe it's an activity, maybe it's a destination. That varies. But teleology is inherent to essentialism. And once you have these philosophical pillars, and we can talk about defending them a little bit, that is the metaphysical backdrop or support that allows us to make judgments and evaluations about whether something meets the expectations or fails to meet the expectations, whether it is a good instance or a defective instance. And the moral life really just comes in when rationality comes online, because we can just, again, consider things in the space of concepts, if you will, over and above the physical facts. And we can freely direct ourselves to some ultimate end through various particular means. And importantly, we can judge either rightly or wrongly in our pursuits. So that's just a very general sketch, but I'm sure there's many different ways we could take it from here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess, the first step would be to understand what is the proper nature of something or someone, right? And then once you understand how they're put together, organized, ordered, then you can judge whether something is properly ordered or not properly ordered. Is that pretty much the breakdown?
Yeah, I think that's a really good starting sketch. And again, it's very common sense. And we may use some jargon here or there, but when we see a tree that doesn't sink very deep roots and it kind of looks sickly, we say, "Oh, that's a bad tree." Yeah. And we're not saying like, I prefer my trees a certain way. We're saying, no, it's failing to meet our expectations when we apprehend the nature of treeness, for example, right? So I hear the music coming on, so maybe that's a good place to pause right there.
Yes, absolutely. We're chatting with Pat Flynn of chroniclesofstrength.com, talking about natural law. Stay tuned.
Hi, this is Jesse Romero from the Terry and Jesse Show, also from Jesus 911. Let's face it, we all need to use the internet, but we need screen accountability. Why? Pornography is a huge problem, especially on the internet. And every time we tap into the internet, we get bombarded with images and temptations that degrade our humanity. So we need Covenant Eyes to block these pornographic sites and advertisements from infiltrating our lives. Covenant Eyes helps us take custody of our eyes and custody of our intellect. So I recommend you go to covenanteyes.com and type in the promo code VMPR to support the network. Protect yourself and your family from the imminent threats on the internet. www.covenanteyes.com, code VMPR, live porn free. Thank you for listening to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Thank you. God bless you. Keep the faith.
In 1 Corinthians 13:13, St. Paul says, "So there abide faith, hope, and love, these three." According to St. Ignatius of Antioch, faith is the beginning and love is the end. and God is the two of them brought into unity. Then comes everything else that makes up a Christian. May God grant that we may attain all the virtues that make for authentic followers of His Son.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Pat Flynn of chroniclesofstrength.com. We talk about natural law. And Pat, yeah, that's a great place to start with essences, natures that were put together, were ordered in a certain way. And then there's this directness or teleology that you can differentiate something that's disordered or in order. And I think for a volitional person, for someone who has will, it's a really easy jump from there to ethics, whether an action is a good action or a bad action.
Right, yeah. Do our decisions conform with that which objectively causes us to flourish as the kinds of beings we are? That's the ethical project. And just really quickly, because some people will, of course, object to those foundations. And I think if you're going to try and take down the natural law tradition, you do have to kind of shoot for the legs, right? You have to kind of go for essentialism and teleology. So maybe a few quick remarks on why I think we should affirm these pillars. And aside from the fact that it's just obvious, right? I mean, there's sort of the no miracles argument. Like if there weren't really, essences, if we didn't live in an essentialist world, well, it sure seems like we do. They would almost be miraculous if we didn't, and it still seems so much like we do, right? Like it'd be a miracle if it weren't the case. But we can go deeper than that, and we can give various lines of support, mostly reductios, and say, okay, if there are no essences there, and people will say, well, everything is just a construct of the mind, right? It's a mental construct, or maybe a mental construct and or a social construct. Quickly, you're going to run into problems with that, because then you're going to have to say that the mind is a construct of the mind as well, right? And that's clearly absurd. Nothing can be the cause of itself. Then it would have to pre-exist itself, in which case, then why would it need to cause itself, right? So you can't push that theory all the way down. You would have to at least admit that at least there's something that is essentially the case, the human mind, say, or just the mind in general, and at which case, if we have at least one real essence, then why stop there, right? Like why not just affirm what seems to obviously be the case? That's not to say that nothing is a mental or social construct. It seems like maybe the state of Texas is something like a social construct, for example. But certainly most of the things that do not seem to be mental or social constructs probably aren't, right? So we certainly have room to affirm the reality of mental and social constructs, but things that seem to be real, to have real objective natures, we want to say do, and there's no good reason to deny it, and we have strong reasons to support it. Just by the very simple fact, if you try and push construct theories all the way through, you're going to get to absurd, untenable, self-defeating positions. Same thing with teleology, just very quickly. Let's just start with reason. We all think that reason is inherently directed at or aimed towards the attainment of truth, that truth perfects reason, right? And again, this is very common sense, because if somebody makes a bad argument, we say, no, you're reasoning poorly. And that language betrays our commitment to teleology, because we say that you're reasoning in a way that fails to match up to our expectations of what reasoning should do, which is attain to truth. So if somebody wants to try and take down teleology, you're really going to take down reasoning, right? You're gonna abandon the standard to mark off good reasoning from bad reasoning. As soon as you do that, you're then not going to be able to tell good reasoning from bad reasoning. And as soon as you do that, you're not going to be able to have any good arguments or bad arguments. And as soon as you do that, you're not going to have any good arguments against teleology or essentialism, for that matter. And I don't think anyone wants to pay that price, right? So that's a sort of self-defeat problem that you're going to have if somebody tries to go for the, like I said, the metaphysical legs of traditional natural law. So I think we're on very sturdy ground there. I think that we have every good reason to affirm these metaphysical commitments, no good reasons to deny them. And then once we have that in place, as you said, Gary, it's just a matter of trying to unpack the relevance there, especially for human beings, because we are volitional, because ethics, morality really is just the study of the good life for beings with intellect and will, like us. And then the project becomes one of unpacking the natural powers and the natural ends toward which they attain for humans, because by nature we have certain natural powers that are given to us to attain ends that are perfective of us, that cause us to flourish. Powers of speech, animal appetites, if you will, powers for sexual reproduction, powers for eating, rational powers for the attainment of truth. So there's lots of goods, right? There's lots of goods, but it's also important to understand that there's hierarchy and subordination when it comes to goods. That it seems like there's a higher and more perfective aspect of being human being, namely our rationality, that causes all the lower powers that we share with, say, other animals to participate in a higher or more grand form of being, if you will, that our lower appetites are elevated in a sense and participate now in this rational power that we have. So we should be using our rationality to guide, direct, and govern our lower appetites. Not to say that the lower appetites, the animal appetites, are bad by any means, but they are certainly elevated in us and are relevantly different in us in a sense than how they might be in other animals. And that's important because, when you hear the common objection of LOL, haha, don't you see what monkeys do? Well, that's fine. We're not monkeys. We don't have monkey nature. We have human nature, rational animal nature. And the question is, what is good for us as humans? And we don't base that off of what monkeys do, right? That's just an equivocation. So, yeah, some more stage setting there, but hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, maybe you can defend a little bit about that hierarchy. Someone might say, well, why would a lower appetite not be superior to the higher intellect? Because you see this like in the Matrix. It's like our animalness is what makes us who we are and differentiates us from machines. So why the intellect? Why would there be that hierarchy, if you will, of rationality and the lower appetites?
Yeah, the Matrix is a good thought experiment, right? And it comes out of a number of different philosophical lines of thought. Nozick has a kind of interesting moral thought experiment, and we'll see if we can tie this into your question here, right? Of it's sometimes used as an argument against like utilitarianism or hedonism, right? That whatever the good is, it's just a certain sort of brain state, right? Some type of pleasure, some type of animalistic pleasure, let's say. Or even just mental pleasure, however you want to define pleasure. It's just feels, right? You just feel good, for example. And the idea is something like this. A thought experiment is something like this, right? If you could plug yourself into the Matrix and live a life of complete delusion, right? But you would feel good, right? You would feel very good. All your brain chemistry would be completely optimized. You would never be depressed. You'd never be sad. You'd never even feel pain. You would just feel good. But everything would essentially be a lie. Would that be a good life? And most people's intuition would say no. I would rather know the truth about things, right? I would rather, as they say in the Matrix, take the red pill, right? Everyone watching the Matrix would have been super disappointed if Neo took the blue pill and just went back into the Matrix, right? Now why is that, right? Because the reason is because we understand that there's something about human nature that is the highest and most noblest power among us, and it has something to do with our ability to attain toward truth. That truth, in some sense, is arguably the highest good, right? And this converges theologically with revelation, right? To know the highest truth and to love the highest good, which we ultimately say is God. That is man's proper end. That's why we have this higher power of the rational and the volitional, the higher powers of the rational and the volitional. So to frustrate that and to kind of answer the question, to want to live in the matrix or to want to just live hedonistically or animalistically is to be less than human. It is to be a barbarian, a brute, if you will. It is to not flourish as the kind of thing that we are. And the idea of traditional natural law is that if we were acting completely reasonably and apprised of all the relevant facts, which is important, right? Sometimes we just miss facts, right? Or get facts wrong, then we would follow the dictates of the natural law, understanding that this is what causes us to flourish as the kinds of beings that we are. And then we can set out a sort of, we can use a Kantian framework, in fact, and say something like this, like if we want to be happy, then we should follow the dictates of the natural law, right? We should understand human nature and seek to pursue those things which are properly perfective of it, right? If we want to be happy. But as it happens by nature, that's what all of us want, right? We can't escape that conditional. We all want to be happy. Even the extreme circumstance of somebody who's contemplating suicide, God save them, is only doing it because they feel they would be better off dead. Now, we would argue that you're mistaken about that, but they still do it because they feel they would in some sense be better off because of that. So because we can't escape the conditional of wanting to be happy, we would say, again, to use Kantian terms, that the hypothetical, if you want something, then you should do something else, right? That the hypothetical imperative assumes a categorical force, right? It assumes a universal force because we all do want that something. We all do want to flourish. Then it follows that we all should follow the dictates of the natural law, and that inherently will require us focusing, fulfilling the lower appetites, because we can't fulfill the higher powers, reason and stuff like that, if we're starving to death, for example. So the lower, the animal, the powers we share with the lower animals are certainly important. They're certainly good in and of themselves, but they are subordinated to and meant to ultimately support the fulfillment of the higher powers, right? So there's a hierarchy and subordination there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So you're right. This is all part of our human nature, whether it be rational or just these human appetites. They all work together in harmony, and to have one appetite overpower the other out of order would be like an orchestra where somebody starts playing a solo, right, when it should be an ensemble piece, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy for it, actually. And again, I want to emphasize that these other powers, the powers that we share with other animals, right? Because we are rational animals. They're good, right? They're good insofar as they go. There's just a proper ordering that we need to consider as rational beings.
Very good. We're chatting with Pat Flynn. We'll be right back.
We got Ernesto from Long Beach.
I just wanted to comment, and I just wanted to thank you guys. And I kind of wanted to encourage people that are listening, maybe that are not donating, because honestly, I got to be honest. I used to think you guys were a little
too over the top.
Yeah.
That's right.
If God gave us a lot, and I have the blessing of listening to all this, and I just want to call all the people. I got 5 kids, and I don't make a lot of money, and I'm still donating to you guys.
God bless you, brother. You're amazing.
We have to do this. We have to do the extra. And it's not even the extra. People see it like it's extra. Kneeling for communion, saying your rosary, saying the Divine Mercy Chaplet. It is not extra. It's what the church tells us to do.
Amen. You're a good man, brother.
30 years old, 29 years old, 5 kids, and I thank you guys. But everybody else, man, get on fire. Fight for the truth, man. I know what I'm telling you guys. There's
I
so
love
much
it.
out there.
If you shop on Amazon.com,
There's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. We're chatting with Pat Flynn of The Pat Flynn Show. You can check out his great stuff at chroniclesofstrength.com. And, Pat, maybe this is a good time to introduce the perverted faculty theory, which, by the way, has nothing to do with twisted teachers or administrators. But, since we're talking about human flourishing, why don't you take it from there?
Right. So the idea here is, it's going to be good for us based on our nature to use our natural powers in their natural way, or to make sure we're using a natural power that it will attain its natural end, because that's why we have the natural power in the first place, right? Is to attain an end that is objectively good for us, that causes us to flourish. And once you understand that, I think it's pretty easy to understand why perverting the faculty while intentionally directing it away from its natural end will never be good for us, right? Will never be good for us. Now, there's some tame examples that we can start with. And then there's obviously the more controversial examples. I've been interested in this related to sexual ethics recently, because here's the interesting thing about traditional natural law, and something that I've been thinking about and have been working on some stuff for publication. And I've been presenting something of kind of a dilemma in the writings I've been doing. And the idea is this: that if you want to affirm, as most of us do, that there is some type of objective moral binding structure to the world, right? That morality is not some figment of our imagination. It's not some illusion, but there really are truly good and bad acts, truly right and wrong behaviors and intentions in the world. What I argue is that if you want to affirm that, which you should, and pretty much all of us do, because very few people want to bite the bullet and say that there's nothing really wrong with certain acts like rape or torturing small young children or things like that. I say good that you want to affirm that. That means that your moral faculty is working, right? That's good. But here's the deal. The only way you're going to be able to affirm that is if you accept the commitments that we've been sketching out here on this show. And that's going to give you really a traditional natural law perspective. Now, here's the thing. If you accept that, however, there's going to be other moral consequences that, at least in our day and age, are very culturally unpopular. Because what we'll realize is that the human life is suffused with moral decision-making, and that morality, the good life, it's almost everything we do, right? Like, not everything is a huge moral decision, but so much of what we do, the habits we develop, the daily decisions we make, have moral importance. And this will spill over into many aspects of life, but including and especially sexual aspects. And contemporary culture wants to kind of bring morality down to a sort of minimum effective level, where they're trying to have their moral cake and eat it too, right? They're trying to hold on to an objective morality, but not have it so suffusive as it would be in traditional natural law. And what I've been arguing is that's unsustainable, right? If you're going to have morality, it's going to go all the way through. It's going to be it is going to suffuse our lives, and there's going to be implications for how we act in our daily conversations of being truthfulness, right? We'll talk about lying. That'll be a sort of tame example for the perverted faculty argument and why that's wrong, but also sexual ethics, right? And traditional natural law will give you something of a very traditional sexual ethic, right? That the sexual power is oriented towards a procreative and unitive function, right? And what I've been arguing recently is that if you're going to try and deny that, you're going to have to undercut all the foundations of morality. So if you want morality, you're going to get sexual ethics and some that are culturally unpopular at the time. If you don't want sexual ethics, you're just not going to have a moral system. That's the end of it. There's no middle ground here. And the perverted faculty argument comes in defending some of these positions as an extension of the traditional natural law. Lying is a good example. It's not completely uncontroversial, but the idea here is it's good for us to use a natural power in its natural way towards its natural end, under the right circumstances and with the right intentions, right? That's kind of what marks off a good act. Well, take something like speech, right? This is a natural power that we have. I don't think anyone's going to argue that speech is a natural power we have. What is the natural end of speech? What is this aiming at? What is the teleological function of speech, we might say? Well, it seems pretty obvious that speech is just meant to convey what's in our head, right? It's meant to get what is in my head out of my mouth and into your head, Gary, or into the heads of our listeners, right? It's meant to kind of put my mind into your mind, if you will. That's what speech is there for. So the natural end of speech is, hopefully ultimately to communicate truth, but if not to communicate truth, at least communicate what I believe, right? Because maybe I believe some false things, but I at least should be communicating them sincerely. I shouldn't be using my power of speech away from its natural end by misrepresenting what I actually believe, right? So that would be a perversion of the faculty. And because we can see that this is a natural power that tends towards the natural end of getting into your mind what is in my mind, it's always going to be bad for us. Just by, sort of by the metaphysical understanding of the case, always unnecessarily bad for us to lie. That lying is always going to be bad for us. It's always going to tilt us away from our objective flourishing. Maybe in a minor way, maybe in a major way. And there's degrees here, right? Like, some things we do with our faculties might be just a very minor offense. Other things might be a very major offense. And we can go pretty far philosophical with some of this, but it's often the case. Philosophy will kind of hit an edge, will hit an element, and then we'll have to kind of, I would argue, break into theology, for example, maybe define more specifics or details of what the consequences of certain actions may be, or just distinctions between, as we would say in the Catholic tradition, between venial and mortal sins, for example. But that would be a general sketch of the perverted faculty argument, is that when it comes to our powers and the natural ends which they tend towards, it's always going to be the case metaphysically and necessarily that it will always be bad for us to pervert a faculty, to intentionally direct it away from its natural end. And this will have consequences all over the board, but it will specifically have consequences in sexual ethics as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's so you have to know the purpose or the ends of things in order to find out whether or not you're perverting it or using it in an improper way. So like you said, with speech, you're trying to convey what's in your mind. So a lie would pervert that faculty by presenting something that actually isn't in your mind. You're saying something that is false. So
yes,
is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we can, maybe we can get some of the things wrong, but the general principle is right. And this is important. When it comes to an essentialist worldview, we're not saying that we know what the essence of every single thing is, right? And I don't think we do. I think there's a lot of things where we don't quite grasp what the essence of something is. And that's why we do philosophy and science, right? To kind of unpack the powers and essences of things. Or other times we only grasp the essence of something in an incomplete way, right? Now, there's some things where clearly we understand its essence, right? So I just want to be clear about that, is that the principles can still be right, but maybe we might be factually wrong on some cases. Now, I think something like speech is pretty obvious, right? It seems pretty clear that the natural end of speech is communicating what is in my mind and getting that across to you. But there's other things where it might be somewhat opaque, and that's for the natural law theorists to work out, right? The details of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's jump to contraception then. So how would that apply?
Right. So again, I think it's something where the sexual faculty is pretty obvious in a way that maybe some other powers aren't always so obvious. And some support of this would be just the simple fact that what the natural law theorists would say about the sexual powers is something that you can hear almost verbatim out of the mouth of somebody who is an atheistic Darwinian biologist, for example, right? It's something that we can agree on in principle. That the sexual faculty is for the purpose of both procreation and unity between a man and a woman, right? And, does this need a lot of defending, or is this just going to be common sense? We only have a few minutes left here, so I'm just going to just grant me that assumption, right? But again, something that an atheistic Darwinian biologist can easily agree on. Now, they wouldn't necessarily agree on the moral import of that, but that's irrelevant because I would just argue they're wrong on their metaphysics. And once you bring in the metaphysics that I've explained, we can use their testimony as support to what the natural law theorist wants to say about the sexual faculty, right? It converges very strongly. Well, then, various forms of contraception are clearly in an analogous way to lying, something that is perverting the faculty, right? It is tending us away from an end that is objectively good for us, right? That is objectively good for us. It is a perversion of the sexual faculty and the power. And, whether it's chemical contraception, whether it's, I don't know how many gory details we want to get in here on the family radio program, right? Or the withdrawal method or whatever, or even masturbatory acts would all be examples of clear perversions of the faculty, a power which, mind you, unlike some other powers, because we have certain powers that are aimed at a sort of involuntary general production, like perspiration and something like that. But the sexual act, say the act of ejaculation, has a very definitive point, a climax point that is aimed at a very specific end, which is, as you learn in basic, human reproductive classes, to get semen into a vagina, right? Just to be very specific about it. So to frustrate that power in a way that you're really just focusing on the means rather than the end. And what are the means? The pleasure, right? The pleasure of sexual activity, while intentionally frustrating the end is, as I say, once you understand the metaphysics, always going to necessarily be bad for us. In a way similar, here's another kind of parallel example, that bulimia is something that even in today's culture still most people recognize this is a bad act, right? Why is it a bad act? Because you're in the act of nutrient assimilation, which is why we eat, right? Now we have pleasure attached to food because that's nature's way of getting us to eat, but pleasure is the means for the proper good and end of eating, which is nutrient assimilation. So there we're focusing overmuch on the means and intentionally frustrating the end, which is nutrient assimilation. And we say, no, that's really bad. That's really bad for you. So I would say also in an analogous way, right? If you can see how this would be the case with bulimia, it should start to hopefully become a little bit more clear of how this would equally be the case in intentionally frustrating the sexual act as well.
Yeah, very good. Well, Pat, hey, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime, Gary. It's always a blast.
All right, that's Pat Flynn. Check out his stuff at chroniclesofstrength.com. Man, the hour's flowing, but never fear. Terry and Jesse will soon be here with the Terry and Jesse Show. High impact Catholic talk coming at you. Thank you so much for listening, and God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow to this show, which we call Hands on Apologetics. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.